My name is Walter Jennings. And 30 minutes after a drunk biker hit me in the face, a Black Hawk helicopter landed outside that bar, not for war, not for violence, but for respect. You see, when you spend your youth flying through gunfire and chaos to save people you barely know, you don't expect your final battle to happen in a roadside tavern surrounded by beer bottles and neon lights. But that's where it happened, and it started with a single shove. It was a Friday evening in late October, the kind of night when small towns like Pine Ridge, Montana, glow under orange street lamps and smell faintly of pine and diesel. I was at the Rusty Spur Bar, same as every Friday for the last 10 years. A quiet stool, a cold beer, and a view of the door. Old habits from the army die slow. I just set down my wallet, the one with a faded Vietnam veteran patch, when I heard the roar of motorcycles. 3 of them. Loud, young, and careless. They pulled up like they owned the place. The leader, a tall kid with a sleeveless vest that said Iron Reapers MC, walked in first. He had a buzz-cut too much swagger and the kind of grin that told you he'd never been punched hard enough to learn manners. His name, as I'd later hear, was Tyler Henson, but folks around here called him T-Rex. The jukebox played Simple Man, and I was halfway through my beer when he tripped on my walking cane. "Watch it, old man," he barked, eyes narrowing. I looked up calm. "Sorry, son. Didn't see you there." He didn't move. His friends started laughing. "You didn't see me. Maybe you're too old to be out here," he sneered, nudging my cane with his boot, until it clattered to the floor. I let out a slow breath. "Pick it up, please." He smirked. "Nah. You look like you could use the exercise." The room went quiet, that kind of silence you only hear when everyone knows something wrong is happening, but no one's brave enough to stop it. Then he reached forward and slapped my cap clean off my head. My Vietnam veteran cap. Laughter echoed through the bar. His friends snorted beer through their noses. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked, but my spine didn't bend. "Son," I said evenly, "you just made a mistake. You'll remember longer than your tattoos." He leaned closer, breath stinking of whiskey. "Is that a threat?" "No," I replied. "It's a promise, but not the kind you think." Then he shoved me, hard. My shoulder hit the bar counter. My beer-spilled glass shattered across the floor. Someone gasped. Marla, the bartender, froze with her rag mid-air. "You okay, Mr. Jennings?" she whispered. I straightened my hat. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Then I turned back to Tyler and looked him dead in the eye. I fought men who didn't know mercy. You're not one of them. You're just lost. He laughed, mocking. "What are you gonna do, Grandpa? Call your army buddies." I smiled a small, knowing smile. Something like that. And then I walked out. Outside, the night air hit sharp against my cheek where he'd struck me. I felt the sting, sure, but it wasn't pain that filled me. It was disappointment, not for me, but for the world that raised boys like him to think cruelty was courage. I walked to my old Ford truck, opened the glove box, and pulled out a small, cracked phone. There was only one number in it that still mattered. Dan Rooker. Dan had been my crew chief back in '71. He still worked down at the National Guard airfield 2 towns over, handling maintenance for the Black Hawks. When he picked up, his voice was raspy familiar. "Walt, you okay?" "Not exactly," I said. "Got a situation at the Rusty Spur." There was a pause. "You hurt?" "Not in the way you mean." "Need me to call the sheriff?" I hesitated. "No. I need you to remind some folks what respect looks like." Another pause. Then I heard his chair creak. "You serious?" "Serious enough to dust off the bird." Dan chuckled low, knowing. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic." "Not drama," I said. "Just closure." He didn't argue. "Give me 30 minutes." Back inside the bar, Tyler was bragging to anyone who'd listen. "Guy probably faked half his war stories," he laughed. "Probably just polished coffee pots in the mess tent." No one laughed back. The older patrons just shook their heads and stared into their drinks. Even Marla kept her eyes down. Outside, I sat in my truck engine, off window cracked just enough to feel the wind. I reached for the little medal hanging from my mirror, the Distinguished Flying Cross. Not because I needed to remember who I was, but because I needed to stay calm about who I'd become. I thought about Helen, my late wife, about how she used to tell me, "Walter, you can't fix stupid, but you can teach it the manners." So I waited, and right on cue, 30 minutes later, the quiet night began to tremble. It started as a hum, low, steady, growing into a roar that made the beer bottles on the bar shake. The bikers looked up confused. "What the hell is that?" one muttered. Outside, gravel whipped into the air. Lights flooded the parking lot. The Black Hawk came down like an angel of thunder, landing right beside the neon sign that still read, "Cold beer, warm hearts." Only tonight, it wasn't so warm. Tyler and his friends ran to the window, eyes wide. "No way, that's the army." Marla dropped her rag, whispering, "Dear God." And there I was standing outside the door, my hat back on my hands in my pockets, watching as the helicopter's blades slowed to a rhythmic whump, whump, whump that made the whole bar tremble. A side door slid open. 4 figures stepped out, uniforms, pressed boots, shining eyes like steel. One of them shouted over the wind, "Captain Jennings, sir, we got your call." And in that moment, the boy who hit me realized this wasn't about an old man getting even. This was about a lesson arriving from the sky. When that Black Hawk touched down, it wasn't war that arrived, it was memory. And memory has a way of demanding respect where words fail. Inside the rusty spur, no one breathed. Even the jukebox had stopped, stuck mid-song between "Take It Easy" and "Static." Tyler stood frozen by the window, his hand still wrapped around his beer, like a child clutching a toy he suddenly realized he shouldn't have. 30 minutes earlier, I'd been sitting in that same parking lot, staring out over the frozen highway, waiting for the sound I hadn't heard in years. It started small, a faint vibration through the ground, like the heartbeat of something old waking up. Then the unmistakable rhythm, rotor blades cutting the Montana sky. My hand tightened on my cane. "You made good time, Dan," I muttered. The helicopter circled once, graceful as a hawk, over a field, before descending toward the lot. The downdraft sent leaves dust, and old receipts flying in every direction. The moment it touched down, the side door opened, and I saw faces I hadn't seen in decades, younger, stronger, carrying the same quiet pride. Leading them was Captain Morgan Shaw, now in his late 30s, but once a rookie pilot I'd trained myself. I'd taught him how to hover a Black Hawk in the middle of a storm. Now he was the one stepping out like a storm of his own. He approached, helmet under his arm, eyes locked on me. "Sir," he said. Through the noise we came as fast as we could. I nodded. Didn't doubt it for a second. He looked me up and down, saw the bruise forming on my cheek, the old cap still dusted with beer. "You hurt. Not where it counts." He turned his head toward the bar. "He in there?" "Yeah," I said, "with his friends." Thought I'd show him what a real unit looks like. Morgan's jaw tightened. "You sure you don't want us to?" I cut him off. "No, Captain, we're not here to fight." He nodded slowly, understanding. "Then what do you need from us, sir?" I looked at the bar's front door, yellow light flickering through the windows. "Presence," I said. "Just presence." When we stepped inside, the entire room seemed to fold in on itself. The soldiers behind me didn't say a word. They didn't have to. The sound of their boots on the old wooden floor said enough. Marla gasped, hand over her mouth. "Oh my God, they're real," she whispered. Tyler spun around, eyes wide, trying to make sense of the uniforms, the patches, the calm authority. Morgan's gaze locked on him. "Which one hit you, sir?" I pointed gently. "That one. The loud one." Tyler tried to puff his chest out, but the tremor in his hand gave him away. "Hey, this is crazy, man. I didn't mean nothing by it." Morgan stepped closer, his voice steady but cutting. "You hit a man who carried soldiers out of fire in Nam. Men like him kept kids like you alive before you were even born. You don't get to say it meant nothing. The other soldiers didn't move, didn't blink. They were trained for silence, the kind that fills a room with accountability." Tyler swallowed. I didn't know who he was. That's the problem, I said quietly. You never asked. The bar owner, a big man named Carl, came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands. Captain Jennings, sir, he said respectfully. We didn't mean for any of this to happen. I know I told him. No one ever does. Then I turned back to Tyler. Son, when I was your age, I thought strength meant never backing down. Took me a few years and a few funerals to learn that real strength's got nothing to do with who throws the first punch. His lip quivered. The room felt heavy, like the air had weight. Morgan glanced at me. Sir, permission to speak freely. Go ahead. He faced the kid voice sharp. You see this man? He taught me how to keep a helicopter steady while bullets were flying. Because of him, 6 men came home to their families. You think respect's a favor. It's a debt. Tyler's mouth opened, but no sound came out. One of the younger soldiers, a sergeant barely 30, stepped forward. You ever think about who gave you the freedom to drink in this bar, to act like a fool, and still walk out alive? The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was corrective. I put my hand on Morgan's shoulder. That's enough, Captain. He nodded, stepping back. I leaned on my cane, staring at the boy. You don't owe me an apology. You owe yourself a better set of values. He blinked hard, struggling to hold eye contact. I'm sorry, sir, he whispered. Don't be sorry, I said gently. Be different. Outside, the Black Hawk's rotors slowed. Its lights cast long shadows across the parking lot. The sound of it still pulsed in my chest like an echo from a younger life. Morgan turned to me. Sir, you want us to stay? I shook my head. No. Go on back. You've done enough. He gave a small salute. With respect, sir, it's an honor. Always is, I said. They turned and filed out in silence. Boots against gravel. Doors sliding shut. The helicopter lifted slow and graceful wind, sweeping through the bar's open door. As it rose, a napkin flew off the counter and landed at Tyler's feet. He picked it up, a small American flag printed in the corner. He stared at it like it was the first time he'd really seen one. When the helicopter disappeared into the night, I turned to Marla. Sorry about the mess, I said. She shook her head, eyes glistening. That wasn't a mess, Walt. That was church. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch, listening to the wind move through the pines, the same rhythm as the Black Hawk blades. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel forgotten. Some lessons don't need to be shouted. They just need to arrive with grace and discipline. The next morning, Pine Ridge woke up to the kind of story small towns aren't built to hold quietly. Someone, probably the bartender's nephew, had filmed the whole thing on his phone. By sunrise, it was on Facebook, then YouTube, then everywhere. A video titled, Biker Hits 82-Year-Old Veteran. Watch what happens next. By breakfast, the clip had 1 million views. By noon, 5 million. People weren't watching a fight. They were watching a reckoning. Meanwhile, I was back at home, sitting in my garage, surrounded by the smell of motor oil and pine. The walls were lined with dusty photographs. My platoon in Vietnam. My wife Helen, smiling in a sundress. A young pilot standing beside a Black Hawk, me back when my knees worked. I was polishing an old helicopter compass when I heard the knock. It wasn't the sheriff or a neighbor. It was the sound of hesitation. 3 soft knocks, each one smaller than the last. When I opened the door, there he was. Tyler Henson. No leather vest, no arrogance. Just jeans, a plain shirt, and a bruised kind of humility in his eyes. Mr. Jennings, he said quietly, I wanted to talk. I studied him for a moment. He looked younger without the swagger. Scared too. Then talk, I said. He took off his hat. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what you'd done. You still don't, I said evenly. And you don't need to. He nodded, swallowing, but I should have respected you anyway. Didn't need to know your story to know that. That got my attention. He wasn't rehearsed. He was learning. Why are you really here, son? I asked. He hesitated. Because I haven't slept since last night. Every time I close my eyes, I see that helicopter. I keep hearing that sound, those blades. That sound, I said softly, means someone's coming home. He looked at me confused. In war, I continued, that sound was hope. When you heard a Black Hawk, it meant someone had found you, no matter how bad it got. You can't fake that kind of respect. He nodded slowly, voice trembling. I didn't know. I guess I just thought, guys like you were angry at the world. I smiled faintly. We're not angry, son. We're just disappointed that the world forgot who paid the tab. He looked down. I deserved worse than what you gave me. Maybe, I said, but sometimes mercy teaches louder than punishment. He followed me into the garage. His eyes moved across the photos, the patches, the dusty flight helmet on the shelf. You really flew those things, he asked. Thousands of hours, I said. Hot LZs, night missions, medevacs. Some days felt like years. Weren't you scared? Every time, I said. But I had people counting on me. Fear doesn't mean much when you've got brothers in the back praying for your hands to stay steady. He stared at the pictures. You ever lose someone? Too many, I said quietly, but you don't carry their deaths. You carry their lessons. He nodded again, eyes wet. I don't know how to make it right. I walked over to my workbench and picked up a small patch, a worn American flag, edges frayed. I handed it to him. Start here, I said. He took it carefully as if it were glass. What do I do with it? Put it somewhere you'll see it every day. And when you start to forget what respect means, look at it again. He wiped his eyes. Can I come by sometimes? Help around the house or the garage? Sure, I said. But don't do it for me. Do it because you need to earn your own peace. He nodded, voice low. I will, sir. Later that day, a reporter showed up at my driveway, a young woman with too much coffee and a microphone trembling in her hand. Mr. Jennings, can you tell us what message you want to send after what happened last night, she asked. I looked straight at the camera. Ma'am, I said, it's simple. Respect isn't a medal you wear or a rule you enforce. It's something you give because you recognize the cost others paid to make your life possible. She blinked, speechless. Tell them I added that the best revenge is dignity. Always has been. By evening, veterans from across the state started showing up at the Rusty Spur. Some in uniform, some in jeans, some walking with canes. They filled the bar, quiet, peaceful, not to fight, but to occupy it with pride. Carl, the owner, changed the sign outside to read, Veterans Drink Free. Respect mandatory. Even the sheriff stopped by, smiling. Heard you had a little show last night, he said. Just a reminder, I told him. Hell of a reminder, he replied. That weekend, the local high school invited me to speak to the seniors. Half of them probably thought Vietnam was just a movie. I told them about courage, not the movie kind, but the quiet kind. The hardest thing I ever did, I said, was not pulling a trigger. It was walking away when someone hit me and choosing to teach instead of destroy. When I finished, the kids clapped politely, except for one. A tall boy in the back raised his hand. My granddad was in Desert Storm, he said. He never talks about it. Should I ask him? Yes, I said, ask him. But listen more than you speak. You'll be surprised what you learn when silence starts talking. That night, I sat on my porch again, watching the sun go down over the fields. The air was still. The world felt a little less bitter. In the distance, I thought I heard it again, the soft hum of rotor blades fading over the horizon. Probably nothing, maybe memory. But I smiled anyway, because somewhere out there, respect was flying again. A year can change everything. Even a small town like Pine Ridge, where time usually moves slower than a freight train in winter. They'd repainted the Rusty Spur by spring. The neon sign still buzzed, but now the letters read, Homefront Tavern, where respect is always on tap. There was a new wooden plaque by the door, 2 carved by hand from local cedar. It read, Dedicated to those who carried us when we couldn't walk ourselves. Underneath were names local veterans from every branch, every conflict. Mine was near the bottom. I didn't ask for that, but Carl insisted. And right in the middle of that plaque, pinned under glass, was the old flag patch I'd given Tyler Henson. Tyler came by most weekends now. He didn't ride a Harley anymore. Sold it last Christmas. Donated the money to the local VFW hall. He drove an old Ford, same color as mine, sometimes parked right next to it outside the diner. He'd changed not just the clothes or the haircut, but something deeper. He looked people in the eye now. He spoke softer, stood taller. He'd even gotten a new tattoo on his forearm. Just 3 words earned, not owed. That was his reminder. One Sunday afternoon, I was at the diner finishing my coffee when Tyler walked in with a young boy beside him, no older than 10. "Mr. Jennings," he said, smiling nervously. "This is my nephew Chase. He wanted to meet you." I looked at the kid freckles across his nose, a shy grin on his face. "Nice to meet you, soldier," I said, shaking his hand. Chase's eyes widened. "You flew real helicopters." "Still do," sometimes I said with a wink. "Only now I land 'em in people's hearts." He laughed, not really understanding but liking the sound of it. Tyler slid into the booth across from me. "We were talking about what happened last year," he said quietly. I told him how I used to think respect was about power. "You taught me it's about service." I nodded. "You taught yourself. I just gave you the reason." He smiled. "You ever regret calling that helicopter, sir?" I looked out the window at the horizon glowing orange over the hills. "Not once. Sometimes the right message needs the right entrance." He laughed. "Yeah, it definitely got my attention." Later that afternoon, we drove to the Veterans Memorial by the courthouse, a small park with benches, flags, and bronze plaques catching the sunlight. Someone had added a new feature since last year, a bench shaped like a helicopter rotor blade. On it was engraved, "The sound of freedom never fades." We sat there a long time without speaking. Pigeons fluttered nearby. The breeze carried the faint smell of barbecue from a few blocks away. "Tyler," I said, "finally people think redemption's a grand gesture. Truth is, it's quieter than that. It's showing up every day, trying to be the man you should have been yesterday." He nodded slowly. "I think I finally get that." I smiled. "Then you're already ahead of most." A few weeks later, Carl asked me to speak at the bar's first Veterans Night event. The place was packed, farmers, teachers, bikers, old vets, even a few teenagers holding phones they were told not to use during speeches. When my turn came, I didn't bring notes. I just stood by the small wooden stage under the neon glow and said, "Last year I learned something from a boy who thought he was tough. Turns out he was just lost. But here's the thing, most of us get lost. Some just hide it better." The room was silent. "I used to think the hardest battles ended overseas," I said. "But they don't. They follow us home. They sit beside us at dinner tables and bars, in quiet moments, when the world forgets to say thank you." I paused, scanning the crowd. And sometimes the best revenge isn't payback, it's proof. Proof that decency still wins. That you can be strong without being cruel. That you can forgive without forgetting who you are. I took off my cap, held it to my chest. If you've ever worn a uniform or loved someone who did, thank you. And if you haven't, just remember, you don't need to serve to show respect. You just need to listen. Applause rose, slowly, genuine, soft at first, but growing. A few people stood, then more. By the end, the whole bar was on its feet. Tyler was among them, clapping hard, tears in his eyes. When the noise settled, he walked up and handed me a small box. Inside was a silver keychain, shaped like a helicopter rotor, engraved with the words, "For the man who taught me how to land right." I laughed, shaking my head. "You didn't have to do that." He grinned. "I know. That's why I did." That night, as I left the bar, the air was still. The moon hung low, wide and golden. Then I heard it again, faint but clear, rolling down from the mountains, the echo of rotor blades. Maybe training flights. Maybe memory. Didn't matter. To me, it sounded like closure. A month later, my heart gave out quietly in my sleep. No pain, no noise, just peace. The funeral was small, military, simple. They folded the flag, played taps, and lowered me beside Helen under a maple tree. As the crowd stood silent, a sound began to rise from the distance, soft at first, then thunderous. A Black Hawk helicopter flew low overhead, dipping its rotors once before vanishing behind the hills. On the ground, Tyler stood at attention, hand over his heart. The wind from the rotors brushed across his face, carrying dust petals and tears. He whispered, "You taught me, sir. You really did." And when the sound faded, he turned and walked away, not broken, not ashamed, but changed. Because true revenge doesn't destroy, it redeems. And sometimes it lands softly in the heart of the one who needed it most. If this story moved you, if you believe dignity and kindness still have power in a noisy world, take a quiet moment tonight. Think of someone who deserves respect and give it freely. That's how we keep the lessons alive. That's how we honor those who never stopped serving. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of quiet courage, grace under fire, and redemption earned the hard way, stay with us. Like, share, subscribe, because every story that restores faith in humanity is worth being told again. The end.